All right. Welcome to Distilled Security Podcast, episode 9. I'm Justin Leapline. I'm here with Joe and Rick, and thanks for joining us in this episode. We have an exciting episode with a bunch of interesting topics here, but the first one I think we're going to be diving into is setting a budget. If you already haven't set a budget for the year, it's probably about time if you're on the fiscal year cycle and everything. But we figured this is a good time to talk a little bit about, from a security perspective, how we've done it in the past, how we've seen other people do it, the good and pitfalls of that. So, Joe, do you want to start us out? Do you have any thoughts on what do you think a good budget looks like?
Yeah, good. Well, there's lots of. You brought up something earlier. We were talking about should the Office of the CISO want to have a zero budget and really have everybody else handle it? And or
what is that like to define that?
What do you mean?
So a zero budget. So a lot of people, they'll do a continuous budget. So they'll start with all the stuff they paid for last year and assume that's going into next year and everything. But some people might not know that.
Oh, and I was even thinking of something a little bit different. How about I always wanted to have the least amount of budget in my area and have all the groups that were doing work that needed to be secured, have all the budget allocations in their budget for just to secure what they were doing. And so we would offer a service. My budget would be essentially people and then some recurring items like IDS, that kind of things, and MSSP, but other kinds of security.
You would do that internally for the company, like an ITIL type service.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's like a proactive chargeback, essentially.
I mean,
exactly.
Honestly, that's the best way to do that. In my personal opinion, I love when companies actually treat their internal departments as essentially service lines, and account for the budgeting of that, with it. But that's hard to get there.
Yeah, and so that's not. I don't see a ton of people do that.
Right.
But part of what we were talking about got prompted because there were some articles out there. People were like, "Here's what you should do for your budget," and the article had some really cool things I thought made sense, and then some things I thought were a little interesting. Like one is bringing on a FinOps engineer to scrutinize the spending, and I thought that was interesting.
Well, and I also think it really depends on the size of your organization. Like if you have a team of 10 people in your security, I'm not sure they'll be able to squeeze as much out of that budget as they really can. Now, if you're a big bank and your security team is in the hundreds, I'm sure there's waste in there, type of thing.
And just a pivot.
And optimization,
Yeah, and just a pivot on that, like instead of like a financial operations engineer, you might get more bang for the buck if you have some particularly big contracts, right? There are all these outfits out there that essentially specialize in like, hey, let us analyze your contracts, analyze your current deals, look at the T's and C's, look at all this stuff, and help you understand how you can do better next negotiation cycle because they understand the ins and outs, they know when to negotiate, all those sorts of things. And for all the big players like Office 365, like the Microsofts, the Oracles, the SAPs, the Salesforce. So like for big things, like, I mean, yeah, you could bring in a FinOps engineer to do like all of it, but I would probably get more bang for the buck. And usually they keep people cash positive. So what they do is they'll say, all we want is like 15% of what we cut out of your contract, right?
Yeah.
So where do you think FinOps engineer term came from? Is it we only hire engineers and we got this person and when they need to look at where our cloud spend is and they look at the finances?
Yeah, probably.
So we got to call them an engineer. So, hey, FinOps engineer.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe. I guess I don't really know what it is.
A Gartner term somewhere.
Yeah, I thought it was something like it cuts across all the verticals of finance. So what do you? I mean, depending again on how big your program is. If you have millions of dollars of budget, then like, what are you doing with your dollars when they're not a thing? But I mean, usually that's finance anyway. So I don't know.
One of the things that I took away from the article was optimizing and rationalize is the way they framed it. But to me, that's something that I'm seeing a lot of. Companies over the years have been buying best of breed. And what's happening, all these best of breed point solutions, is they're all being integrated into each of those companies' platforms. And when they're selling them, they're selling platforms, not just renew the tool. So one of the things that I've been doing is with our team is going in and looking at what a company is purchased. What did they get? What is the overlap? There's probably 60, 70, 80% overlap in what these tools do.
Yeah.
And as part of your budgeting process or your planning process is looking how you can reduce some of this duplication.
Well, yeah, and I think that goes to a point of leadership, into that, because a lot of times these budgets are created through like whack-a-mole, type of things. Like we have a pain point, let's go and get a tool. It's this one department that just goes up through, type of things. Like, oh, it's only $100,000. They need it. They said they really want it. We'll just purchase it. But there's not a lot of times an overall strategy, to it. I've seen this a lot with like IT, like help desk stuff. When we're talking about like a GRC tool with help desk, with CMDB and all that stuff, I mean, ServiceNow comes into play, but nobody wants to take the big bite, and it's a good ecosystem. It takes a lot of work, it's not something for the faint of heart, but those conversations don't happen,
Right.
It's like, is this best for our organization going forward? We're 2,000 people. We're using like a little ticketing system. Like I had this one client using like Freshdesk, which it was awful type of thing. They were way past it, and
Awful for their size.
yeah, exactly. And it was just, nobody's having the higher conversation of where do we need to go strategically. And sometimes it's called like a center of excellence, but it's exactly your point. It's like we need a strategy around our tooling procurement and deciding, when to say no to it, when to consolidate, and actually get a strategy to where we're going.
I definitely agree. That was one of the notes that I had written down about a thing that I didn't see in this article, and you guys both hit it. It's have a legit security strategy, and that's not a roadmap, and that's not a plan, right? It's an approach towards achieving the objectives that you need to achieve. So one of the things that I've done in prior lives when we were helping companies map the budgets, right, is we take, say, the MITRE ATT&CK framework, map all the defensive and protective in different categories tools to that framework, right? Look at the overlaps where you have certain coverage and effectiveness and all these sorts of things. And basically, you can say, oh, look, you have these holes. And it's an imperfect framework. All frameworks are imperfect. But it gives you a decent visual across all these key tactics and with the kill chain and all that about, oh, where are we really strong? Where are we really weak? And I would take that one step further and say, well, as a security organization, do you need to be super strong everywhere? Do you need to be absolutely great at everything? Or if you focus really heavy on like initial access, lateral movement, exploitation and exfiltration, is that enough for you based on the nature of your business and what you do? And you can start to like look at your budget in a really strategic way because the approach you're going to take towards securing your environment is very specific with how you do it. So I think that's really important, is even thinking about the budget, but think about it strategically, backing up. How do you want to run your security department?
Well, I mean, that ties into the rationalization.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah.
I see it so many times when the budget gets like messy. It's again, I bring back to the whack-a-mole. Like they're just getting a tool to solve a pain point, not thinking about big picture.
Not even looking to see if they already have a tool that solves that pain point.
Right,
so it brings up two thoughts. One is just on the savings. So when you go the platform route, which is something I'm pretty much in favor for, I haven't really seen good arguments not to do that versus the point solution that's best of breed. But you also get the benefit of, do I have to have more people now because I have more tools?
When I go to the platform you manage.
Well, with the platform, you end up being able to simplify.
There's some efficiencies.
You can
but you
reduce
still need, with a platform too, like you need more people to manage that platform now.
But you don't need people who are experts in 10 different platforms and 10 different tools.
Yeah.
You can get some synergies because if you go all the one route, now you can be trained up on that. So now you imagine like you're one engineer. Do they need to know 4 different things and how it works, or just how the one platform works and understand how it interfaces within itself? Well, so that's some efficiency.
And your integration points too, right? If you're really trying to manage this stuff out of one place or centralize or automate whatever, it's significantly easier if it's within one ecosystem.
Yeah.
Well, and so back to like the core of budgeting.
Yeah.
So a lot of budgets for enterprises, and I see this totally different. Enterprises, end up taking their last year's budget, figuring out what they need to do, and then kind of moving that forward. Smaller companies will do that too, but they're much more dynamic.
Right.
And so, but in either way, uh, I usually see people have struggles with budgeting for both people and the tools, and then combining my thought. So I built something years ago called the Security Management Framework. I probably talked about it in a past podcast. But basically, it's an inventory of all of your processes. And then for each process you have, it's, well, what are the, or each service, and then what is the process that delivers that service? So think of a spreadsheet. The first column is the service, and then like maybe it's vulnerability management. And then what are the processes? Well, you have to inventory the, keep everything up to date. And, you have a series of those. And for each one of those processes, it takes so many hours a month to do the process.
Yeah.
Some processes are scheduled and some are reactive. And so every time it happens, how long does it take?
Right.
So now you start to build a measurement of how much people time it takes to do a thing. Well, then as you go through that process, you can evaluate your own maturity for that process. You can have a column where you put a link to all the tools. And then you can say for each of these tools, back to what you said, what problems it's solving, how important is it, how much does it cost me?
Yeah.
And now you've blended what you said with the people that you need backing into the services you're providing in your service organization.
That's the other thing I wrote down was like total cost of ownership was like a huge thing in the aughts or whatever, but it kind of is that. It's like, what's the total cost of ownership of the security capabilities we're providing, right? And some of that, I think it is tools, some of that's people, some of that is potentially dependencies on other teams. And if they stop doing the thing, do you have enough flex in your budget to fill that gap so that your capability doesn't fail just because their thing changed? So
when you look at total cost of ownership, how many years out do you typically do your?
It's tough because environments shift so much, but I typically think 2 or 3 usually.
Yeah, I've gotten to a point where I was able to do
even for like infrastructure stuff.
Yeah.
Okay.
When you have the data available, I mean, it depends on the environment, right? Some are.
Well,
cleaner
I see
than
that
others.
with like laptops and everything. Like that's a thing. But your core router, is that the 2 or 3 year? I think that's more to like 5 to 7.
Oh, well, fair. I mean, it's spread across.
If not more, I've seen 20
I'm not
years.
saying I'm not suggesting you only have a 3-year cycle for depreciating every piece of hardware.
Yeah.
But when I think about like the time horizon by which I'm managing it, I'm usually thinking about that 2 or 3 years out. So I think about how long is this asset going to last.
Oh, I like the blend. I like what you're saying about the 2 to 3 year. What am I doing? What's my strategy?
Yeah.
But when you go buy stuff, some of these vendors will come to you with a here's our 5-year contract. And I'm all in favor of a 5-year contract because you can get a really good deal out of it. But when you're looking at that 5-year contract, not everybody actually takes the cost of it and looks at all the things that are involved across that 5 years.
Oh yeah, absolutely right.
So, I typically would go with do your TCO, build it on a 5-year model, see what efficiencies you can get, push the vendor to make sure that you know what they're going to do to charge you over time. How does the support model work? All that stuff. And look at your company. Are you going to need, how many more licenses will you need in 5 years? Are you growing?
Right.
Are you staying the same? So
are you adopting more cloud first strategy? So you're decreasing on-prem. Like I have a client going through right now and they're looking at their spend on some of their data centers. They're like, we just need to keep the lights on for another 2 years, as we migrate, type of thing. So,
well, in those longer term contracts, another thing I'd say, because I've seen this across a couple negotiations recently, a lot of times vendors, whether it's software or labor, will say something along the lines of, oh, here's how we're going to account for inflation. And if it's labor, here's how we're going to account for raises or price hikes. And that'll be like baked in. Don't forget that as the customer, you have the power to say, okay, well, what are you going to do to get more efficient year over year? What are you going to do to counterbalance those costs, right? Because oftentimes, particularly like in the labor space, you can say, oh, well, if you have like an MSP or an MSSP, right? They might say, well, the costs of people are going up. And you say, yeah, but we expect you to get more efficient over time too, right? So are you going to actually keep that flat or get closer to flat than you are?
I was going to bring up AI, but you talked about automation.
Absolutely.
And how AI might make things easier. That was one of the points of the article. And it was more like a takeaway. Yeah, sure. Automate and use AI.
Yeah.
I don't think we're there yet, though. We're not going into an AI conversation, but I mean, it helps out a lot of the stuff, but it's just not there to replace. A lot of people are saying it's going to replace FTEs. Like, it saves minutes, not hours.
The best quote on this I've ever heard, and I apologize if I've said it on the podcast before, but I was talking to a lawyer several years ago, and they're like, AI is not going to replace lawyers. Lawyers that use AI are going to replace lawyers that don't use AI.
Well, it's funny because I have the very similar thing written down to say, yeah, AI won't take your job, but somebody who knows how to use AI will take your job.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so it's just building in efficiencies, into it.
Yeah. I think the only other two budget things I have super quick were one, as much as possible, make sure you're framing your budget as business drivers, right? It's very easy to say, I need, or we're not going to secure the business if not X, Y, Z. But you can reframe that often without too much hassle by saying, well, look, the business can move much, much faster if the guardrails that I've installed are strong, right? Because there's a lot less chance of going off the cliff, right? So if you can build essentially the sandbox by which, and the processes by which the business can go innovate and go do the things that the business wants to do, then typically you'll get a lot more support than just like, hey, we're keeping you safe. It's, hey, we're keeping you safe, but us keeping you safe lets you go faster, right? The fact that your tires are good lets you drive faster. And then the only other thing was, this is just kind of a silly thing, but think about your business and what it does, how it makes money, and frame the costs of the things you buy and how many more units you have to sell. So we always did this at Del Monte. When someone would lose a laptop, we'd be like, dude, do you know how many pallets of corn we had to sell to pay for that laptop, right? Because it depends on margins and stuff. And then it kind of just gives you a volumetric thing based on how the company, does business. And I think it's useful for framing I'm asking for $100,000. What does that actually mean in terms of physical goods or labor or whatever that looks like?
Yeah, that's really good.
Yeah, that's a good comparison and everything. I always, brought it up to when we're doing budgets and everything like that, bringing it up to, because there's always a negotiation. Everybody's looking to save as much or put, more investment into other areas. And I often do what you did, just more on the task-based level, but I break it down by hours on a per week, month, yearly basis. And it's a whole, workload breakdown. And typically it's okay, if stuff is coming off, then what tasks are coming off with it?
Right.
Thing.
Yeah. If people if you're not getting positions approved,
tell me what you don't want.
Yeah. I can't work miracles and I'm not willing to work 80 hours a week for a salary job. I'm sorry. That's not a thing. Let's have this conversation, here, and I'm not trying to hold, never trying to hold the business hostage into that, but it's a reality. And
it's really good.
Yeah. Absolutely right.
So something that I've helped people with, even had that conversation today, is when you get to a point that you're got to pull back on the number of resources that you can have, you're not getting approved to get that next person, or somebody left and they're freezing the position. So no rehire. What do you do? So my recommendation has been, well, you can't force the business to give you the new hire, but what you can do is make sure you manage that risk. A new risk got created the minute you didn't get the resource that you needed to do the job at the level they wanted. Something needs to change. So when you don't have the number of people to do the processes, when it takes X number of hours per month to get that process done, and the business expects that you're going to get it done in a certain time frame. Well, your OLAs, your SLAs, they're going to have to change. You can't do it. You can't get as many things done in that month.
Right.
Well, that creates risk. It's risk for somebody. So make sure you update your risk register with the risk that's created because of the lack of resource, whether it's a person or just budget to buy the thing you needed to fix a control.
And I'd say, and make sure that's absolutely right. And I'd make sure you're building a little bit of flex into, or extra time for, the issue du jour, because they're going to come up, right? So if your entire budget is wall to wall, 40 hours a week for every single person on, well, this is what they're doing, you probably need an additional category in there for oh crap moments.
Well, in fact, when you go and add this really cool little formula where you have your 20/80 hours per person per year, nobody ever only worked 40 hours, but let's just go with that.
Yeah.
And
That's
then,
you don't want to
base
over.
calculation.
then you got to subtract out how many holidays does the company give them? How many vacation days will they probably take? How many sick days will they take? Let's subtract all that off. And now your 2080 comes down to around 1,600.
Yep.
And now you have 1,600 hours per person that you're going to put across all those things. So what you end up doing is you get that spreadsheet of all the things you have to do, and then the number of hours annualized. At the bottom, you're going to have some tens of thousands of hours of things that need to be done, depending on how big your company is. And then you know how many people you have, and you multiply that by the 1,600. That's going to show you a gap right there.
Yeah.
Yep.
I've always logged a risk for, we have a risk that we aren't going to satisfy these processes in the time frame that you want, because we have this disparity between what we have and what you're asking for.
Yeah. The language that I've always used for that is requirements require heroics. It's like my brief thing. It's like, look, if you need these things and we don't have enough time in the day, then you're relying on people to be heroes to make it happen, and you can't do that.
Yeah. Right. At least in a long-term strategy.
Yes. Yeah, you can people can sprint. Right. There are implementation time. Like you're in IT or security, you expect that sometimes there's long hours, but yeah.
Yeah, but that can't be a normal part of the job.
Don't if you're doing a budget, don't plan for it to be.
Yeah.
That's great.
Okay. Good first topic.
Yeah.
Rick, you want to introduce us to the bourbon du jour?
Oh, sure. So I was lucky enough to be invited to speak to some lovely people. They asked me what my favorite bourbon was, and I said something I can't get in Pennsylvania. And so
it's very open policy there.
Yeah, that's true. they were spoiled for choice. But they picked a lovely bottle. It's a Rabbit Hole or High Gold cask barrel or single barrel cask strength.
Okay. Yeah, and we did a little bit of research coming onto this. So they have high golds out there readily available, but the single barrel, this is a special release. They have a whole bunch of different artists doing different things on this. This is Total D and Total Dumb, and this was only released in Ohio, correct?
I think that's right,
Yeah, it says on this. It's 109 proof, 109.2, and everything. And it's really good.
I really like it. Yeah. I think it's excellent.
So cheers, guys.
Cheers.
Yeah, we mentioned before, it has that like citrus
super
punch,
citrus up front,
and then it kind of goes into like a grainy. I picked up wheat the first time I tasted it, as kind of settles out and everything like that.
You mentioned pepper, and maybe that's why I'm tasting pepper, but I get a little pepper.
A little on the back, yeah. It's really nice. I like this a lot.
Yeah, cheers, guys. All right, so next on the topic list, do you have that, Joe?
Well, we were looking at how Marriott and the FTC came up with their consent order. So quick background on that. Marriott's been hit by both a multi-state and an FTC settlement because of their breaches that started in 2014.
49 out of 50 states sued them.
Yeah. And it's because they had breaches of over 130 million U.S. customer guest records that went, some of it went undetected. Intruder went undetected for 4 years in their network.
Yeah.
And so
it was 3 separate breaches.
Yes. Yeah.
It was 2014, 2018, and 2020.
Something like that.
Something like that.
And I think I just saw a news article post in the last day that talked about a service provider that they use having been breached, and I'm just waiting to find out. I don't have the details, but now I'm wondering whether or not they're going to, on the heels of. So this is just December that these settlements happened. So just a month ago, and now all of a sudden I don't know if they're going to be involved in another thing, but one of the service providers that serve lots of hotels were just announced to have breached some data. So who knows? Maybe they'll have a interesting thing.
Now, have you guys had the pleasure of working in the hospitality industry? I know you have.
Yeah,
I've been on engagement with you
a little bit.
Yeah. Now,
no, tell me about it.
They're notoriously by the seat, and a lot is franchised out. So which they're just typically very bad in security. stuff stuffed in drawers, things left unlocked, no password or security post-it notes on the walls, like, basically the worst, when you're going in from a security perspective. We did several like PCI stuff, and it was just sometimes a
little
train
rough.
wreck, things and everything. And just getting them to understand that it's not, the three people in the back office
Right.
doing all the orders, for 3 hotel sites is,
Yeah. Well, and it's like, in some ways it can be like, retail or anything else where, there's sort of a mothership, right?
Yeah.
Somewhere, and then there's just tons and tons and tons of physical locations that need all this, care and feeding.
Yep.
And have their own, technology hopefully standardized, but maybe not if it was, a single owner hotel that, got bought up by the conglomerate or whatever. So you end up with this an industry that has a ton of M&A but also all the challenges of, trying to manage tons and tons and tons of physical locations from one place. So I feel for the challenges, but that doesn't mean the challenges don't exist.
Yeah.
They're out there.
And there are some good ones out there.
Yeah.
Just, I don't want to cast the entire industry, but more times than not, there was wide open gaps, and it's understandable. I mean, these are people trying to run a small business, essentially, a couple of site hotel, it's not that big, type of thing.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, security is usually the last thing on their mind, when it's coming to this. But yeah, in this case, I thought it was interesting. I threw it in the docket here. So they got sued out the wazoo. Like they settled like over $100 million.
Yeah.
The UK sued them. Obviously, 49 and 50 states.
The multi-state one was $52 million.
Oh.
Okay. Yeah.
Which state didn't sue them?
I don't know.
Was it Alaska?
I'm
trying to think. I'm so curious now. We'll look it up later.
Yeah.
We'll put it in the show notes.
Yeah. But yeah, now they're being mandated. They settled with the FTC that they have to build pretty robust security program. Some of it is not surprising, type of thing, reading it. Some of it is you have to be audited by an external party every single year, have to have that available for submission, all this stuff and everything.
Yeah, the multi-state said that, and then the FTC also said the same thing. So they're getting both of these settlements are for the same mandates, the consents, and both of them said every other year, but what FTC added, so every other year for an external party to audit, but they need to send on an annual basis a compliance report of their security to the FTC.
Right.
So now they have an
including,
annual
I think, attestation by their CEO.
Certification.
Yeah.
And to what you said, Rick, was interesting because one of the things that they said they have to do, and as I look at this list, I'm like, yes, people should do these things.
Yeah.
It's plan for performing security reviews before connecting new acquisitions into the network.
I know there was a lot of good hygiene stuff, but there were two things that for whatever reason stood out at me. And one of them was they seem to pay a lot of attention to the treatment of terminated users.
Oh, good.
And they seem to pay a lot of attention to M&A activity.
You know why they terminated users?
No, I don't.
Last breach.
Was it? Okay,
Yeah, it was 2 employees, and they probably got into that accessed millions of customer records.
Well, I was thinking that, like, in the combination of breaches, it seemed likely to me, based on the focuses of the language, that something had to do with terminations and something had to do with M&A.
Yeah, that was the 2020 breach, I believe. Yeah.
Well, let's unpack this. And one of the complaints, they said Marriott and Starwood deceived customers by claiming to have reasonable and appropriate data security when they in fact failed to deploy reasonable security to protect the consumer's personal information. And that's what they said resulted in 3 separate data breaches. So what's interesting about that is that, the company, what company out there is claiming that they will not protect data?
And I actually thought about this, so that's always the FTC and some of the other things, like you claim from a consumer basis that you're protecting everybody, but obviously you really suck at this.
Because you got breached.
Because you got breached. So wouldn't it be funny if some company be like, we don't do that good at security,
That's what I was saying.
You're up to your own.
What company is out there saying, we don't do that.
Yeah.
I'm blanking on the legal term, but there's a legal term that's like, it's essentially a reasonableness thing. It's goodness of, or fitness of purpose or something like that. And it's kind of like, you're doing all the normal things that companies should do, including not breaking laws, right? Like, and these are like implied guarantees that every service that's ever
the
sold
consumer
has.
protection type stuff and everything. So whether it's an implicit we do it and breaking, you can still get hit over the head for a reasonableness, you know, and it'll be lawyers arguing in court, you know, like, hey, they didn't do this, and you know, NIST says this, that they should be doing this, and you know, whatever it is, you know.
Well, I also find it humorous that as part of the settlement, here's what they're prohibited from. They're prohibited from misrepresenting how they collect, maintain, use, delete, and disclose consumer personal information. So, they're not allowed to misrepresent how they treat your data.
I read that, I was like, you have to follow the law. Like, I was
like, would that be normal expectation?
I mean, that's funny. The other thing that was really notable to me about it too was the time frames. Did you see that? There was a lot of references to 20 years.
Yeah, 20 years.
That's not uncommon.
Really?
There's been, so I worked for somebody who was brought into an organization before she was in our legal department at a previous company.
Yeah.
And she had worked at places that did some healthcare stuff. 20-year consent. This is like
I haven't
10 years ago.
Read enough consent decrees. That's
so 20 years isn't uncommon. And typically, those get awarded to these like the big four type companies.
Yeah. I wrote that down too. I wonder who does this.
Awarded?
Oh, that to a 20-year contract,
right?
To do the every other year report and then send it.
That makes sense. Gotcha. And I did also see.
Are they engaged in a 20-year contract? Like, they're mandated by the consent decree, but why would you engage a 20-year contract? What if you didn't like them?
Well, I'll tell you, the commissioner, the FTC commissioner also gets like veto power on who gets to do these audits.
They would need to see the qualifications of the people who do the audit. That was explicit in the document.
It was in there. I saw that.
So do they have a CISP?
I don't know.
I actually read that and I laughed at that. I'm like, how do you define qualifications? Type of thing.
Well, you got to figure it's a balance between, like, you read some of this stuff, like we read it and we're like, okay, but then what's the purpose of it being written this way?
Right.
Well, is somebody else who doesn't have ours or probably most of our audience who are cybersecurity experts background in knowing what these things mean, and so they're overwritten out, and it's like, well, who is it? Is it my, is it one of my family members who doesn't do cybersecurity who's going to have to go to court and like be on a jury of this or what?
Right. Yeah. Or and to even attest to the stuff, right? Yeah. I mean, these CEOs are not necessarily going to be security experts in and of themselves, and they're going to be helped, but ultimately, it's a pretty well-indexed list of you have to do these 100 things or whatever it is.
But I also I saw a lot of the 20-year, and I thought the same thing. Yeah. Because I was thinking, it's like, how is security going to change in another 20 years? Type of thing. Like, HIPAA was written in 1996, and we have it on the docket.
Yeah,
we're
it's only now they're talking about.
But it's been like antiquated for so long. Like it's a small, standard.
Well, what I would hope that the people auditing are going to do is the same thing that any of us would do when we go and look at a program. We want to look at the design. We want to understand if this is reasonable. Are they doing proper risk assessments based on their situation? And then are they applying controls to manage those risks? And that will evolve over
largely,
time.
But they also have to align to all the items in the consent decree as well, I would imagine.
Yeah.
So there are high-level stuff into there, and there's also very specific stuff, that they're in as well.
Well, they're going to have to do those things for 20 years.
Yeah.
And maybe another 20 if they, have another problem.
Yeah. I wonder, did they wow, there's so much parts of this law that I'm not as close to. Like, do they renegotiate consent decree? Like, does that happen? Like,
I imagine you could, but
I've seen
the question is it worth it?
I've seen companies go out of business.
Right.
And not have to finish their consent decree.
Right. Yeah, you shut down, sell off assets, start up a new.
Yeah, and that's all the same people in the new business.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So technically legal, if you do it right.
Yeah.
But that's above our pay grade.
That was interesting, though.
Yeah. So do you think it's as a general question, outside of the Marriott Starwood stuff and everything, do you think this type of strategy where you kind of put mandates onto a company like this, is this a good way of dealing with kind of multiple repeater breach?
I don't know if it's good, but it feels better than a class action lawsuit where I get like a $1 credit to my account.
You don't like that $1? You gotta go out and spend.
Well, you might get that anyway from those 50.
Well, that's true.
$52 million payment they have to make to the states.
Yeah.
But, so
no, the states are going to keep that.
but
then they don't tax me as much, right?
Yeah, right.
Right? No, and yeah, but I do think that for these companies that have this kind of problem, and it becomes a little bit. I mean, I love Marriott. I have lots of Marriott points.
Yeah.
I'm not switching.
Yeah.
But do I want to see them improve? What's going to cause them to improve? Well, now they have to legally improve.
Right.
And sometimes you just have to do that. There's lots of things you can do to avoid it. I remember even checking out years ago the CISO job posting at Marriott.
Yeah.
And it was interesting. And I'm just wondering, like, the controls weren't in place to be able to detect this stuff. We can have a whole separate conversation. I'm starting to think about how do you get yourself into that situation?
Wow. How do you get yourself out of it? Or like, even if it's just like like to your point about like defining and articulating the risks and saying, well, I don't have the resources I need to do the job you want me to do.
Yeah,
like all those sorts of things.
Yeah. And I'm with you guys here. So, there's two thought processes. One, like we've all met bad security executives.
Yes.
Type of thing. Kind of, they like being in that power, but they're not very effective, and everything. But I think I've seen way more just not being empowered, into the position. Like they're asking for resources, they're asking for tooling, and they're like, no, you got nothing. You got basically, we haven't been breached yet. Just keep, doing what you're doing. You got the same team members, type of thing. I think I've seen more of that.
More good people in bad situations than bad people in broad situations.
Yeah,
or whatever.
exactly. Yeah. And it's more of a culture thing, and executive management.
Yeah.
And I feel bad for those CISOs, but at the same time, you should know when to leave before it becomes on your name. You know, I mean, it's hard to do. You're probably getting a nice paycheck. You're trying to keep the lights on and do as good as you can, but at the same time, how many times have we seen in the news where the CISO gets the peg because, of it? And I guarantee going into it, like, I still remember, was it Experian or what was the other credit union when they got breached?
TransUnion?
Yeah, I think it
was the other
Equifax?
Equifax.
Yeah.
Whichever one got the big breach and everything, the CEO came on at like a news station and was like, "Oh, it was the system admin that didn't patch that one system."
I remember that.
You serious right now? Like you're blaming
that was a big bust to throw that poor person
admin,
under.
Type of thing.
Yeah, there's a whole story there that I've heard, and it kind of makes a little bit more sense when you hear all the context. But
okay.
But back to this point, do these decrees help? So if you were looking to go get a security job at a company that's going to have to invest in security
for 20 years.
Yeah. Maybe go look for the ones that have the consent decrees, because
I'll look for those anyway because I'm not going to be bored there.
Yeah. And so you'll get the budget, you get all that, but honestly, I think you'll still have a cultural issue. Like you're looked at as a pariah because you're mandated to do it.
I don't know.
I don't know either. I'm making assumptions, type of thing.
I could see it going either way. Yeah. I could see there being some organizations that don't take the intent fully on board.
Right.
And then I think there's probably some organizations like, yeah, okay, this was a wake-up call. We need to really change how this is working.
It really comes down to the culture, type of thing. But I worry about that aspect. It's not a necessarily given that it's going to be a good role, type of thing. Right.
And then there's probably thousands of employees there who have no idea any of this conversation is happening.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Right.
And so you're so if you have a good C-suite who says, all right, we have to do this. We can't have another problem. Well, that would be a problem. The risk of taking that job is one third party that they're using breaches all that data. It's still breached and it's still their responsibility.
Yeah.
So, you have to weigh
You have to weigh it.
Yeah. Are you coming in as the
But still, I think if you
SWAT
show
team?
due diligence to the regulators, I think
To the regulators and even for yourself when you come in, right? I
Yeah.
think like the entry path, I think we've talked about this on a prior podcast, but like how do you get the lay of the land in a way that's adequate? And some of that's going to depend on like, well, is there an existing consent decree? Like you should probably know that before you take that gig, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, just getting a sense of like how things operate
Yeah.
and what's good and what's not so good.
right.
You got to do that up front.
Yeah. Do an assessment.
Yeah.
Yeah, I talk to a lot of my clients when talking about third party. Again, we could go down rabbit holes, but one of the big things is say like your third parties are going to have an issue. You need a plan for that, type of thing. It's sending them all the questionnaires, getting all the attestation documents. It doesn't. You're basically just doing CYA at that point.
Yeah.
They will have an issue, and you need to put it into some type of incident response planning methodology where you are now coordinating with them, making sure it gets fixed, communicating with your customers as appropriate and everything like that.
Well, and where you can, figure out ways to limit the blast radius if something goes wrong at those third parties,
Yeah.
right?
Well, so hot take. What's your thought on you go into the company that has the consent decree?
Yeah.
They're hiring some type of probably Big Four or similar company that's coming in, doing their assessment for 20 years. They need a new CISO. That's you. You're coming in.
Mhm.
Do you rely on the audit that's happening that has to be done and given to the FTC? Or do you bring in your own group and do your own separate audit with another group? So now you have two.
Definitely doing both.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I like the idea of the both, but at the same time, it might be double costs with it.
It could be, but I think one of those, I mean, as we see this all the time, right? There can be security assessments and then there are like tailored compliance assessments, right? It just so happens this is a security related consent decree, but at the end of the day, and to your point about like 20 years with the same controls, right? I'm pretty sure controls are going to evolve over time. Like I think from my perspective, you have effectively the security reviews being done by whatever, if it's a Big Four firm or whatever that is, that's effectively a compliance audit to make sure you're doing all the same security stuff. I want my internal telemetry and sensors and notes to make sure that things are staying on track, whatever the appropriate frequency is outside of that external party.
And that's 100%. I was thinking more 2 yearly audits or something like that. You're absolutely right. Like there should be no surprises into that annual audit, and whatever you need to get to that point, tracking internally on a weekly, bi-weekly, monthly, like there's a lot of iterations.
And if that means external experts that you have to put in your budget, then great. And if it's just
help you
doing it
build
internally,
and help you turn into a program that you're getting all the stats on a daily basis, essentially on the status of your program. That's really what you're looking at. And then just a validation of like, yep, you're collecting all the evidence internally and your dashboards are exactly spot on what it do. Like that's what I'd want.
And part of the other thing is like, I want proactive ammo. I mean, look, you gotta tell the truth with this stuff, right? But not every auditor gets everything right every single time, right? And if the sort of compliance assessment auditor happens to be getting something wrong, I definitely want some ammo in my back pocket. It's like, well, either I've been looking at this and this is a new recent change, right? So let's limit the scope of what went wrong and how quickly we found it. Or, no, I disagree with you on the merits of this point. Now, how much that actually buys you, I don't know, but at least opens a door for a conversation as opposed to you just being
I just had
surprised.
a conversation with somebody just got thrown into the PCI compliance chair. Never did it before in their life and everything.
Good luck, whoever you are.
And I was giving her some tips. It was like, anytime they say it's an issue, come back to them, ask them what requirements specifically they're talking about.
Yeah.
Look at the verbiage, start talking about, like, if they're saying it's an issue, ask them specifically, why is it an issue? What is it going to take to make it not an issue? Like, it just getting, a lot of people get afraid, in that. And it's like, I have to do exactly what they say.
Right.
And most people have never run an operational side of that being the auditors. I've seen.
People forget the goal is to get
Exception in this room, but
Right.
like some of the people I've hired into the program, like, they're like, you must do this.
Yeah.
It's like, have you ever run a program ever?
People forget the goal is to get to the truth and a reasonable plan to resolve the issues that occur, right? That's typically not and shouldn't be a one-way conversation.
Right.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
So, and I like your take on my question. And I didn't really go into it thinking about what you were saying with the every 2 year just being a compliance audit. But essentially that's what
That's
they're
essentially
looking for.
what it is. Yeah.
And then what do you have to do in the meantime? Well, you got to deep dive into those risk areas that you're really worried about, and make sure that your operational security is actually covering the stuff.
Yeah. And if it isn't, treat it head on, right? Define your risks, tell everyone you need these resources to fix these things, and get it as far as you can with what you have.
Yeah.
And any risks they don't, any risk you don't have resources for, get someone else to sign off on that.
Right.
Great. Next topic.
Yeah. So I brought this up just yesterday, and I'm thinking, or you all thought this might be a good topic to bring up. AI note takers, and there's lots of them out there. There's all these different ones that are getting created. Some of them, you get the AI note taking that joins your Zoom or your Teams call, and it's a side effect of you buying some other AI tool. Some of them are very good. They do summaries. They give action items. End of the day, it's really easy and cheap to sign up, and they'll auto join your calls. So I've been on calls.
Or even not auto joined, like some of the native ones actually have, like Zoom.
Oh yeah,
like built in,
Zoom,
and Teams.
Google, what does Teams have an AI component?
Their Copilot stuff's
Copilot's getting integrated.
Yeah.
Okay, I haven't had experience with that, but yeah, Gemini can go into Meet and all that stuff and everything.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
So my question was, one your hot take on what are the risks and what third-party vendor risk management activities should GRC teams or whoever's responsibility is be doing?
Well, yeah.
I could go.
So, I mean, one of the things that I thought about when you brought up this topic was really thinking about, like, bringing it back to almost a data classification thing. Like, okay, at the end of this, a file or a summary is going to be generated, and it's going to have information. That information is what you talked about. Okay, what's the classification level of that information, right? And how do you typically need to treat those things? And so it could be wildly different if you're on a conversation with your general counsel, right? Versus if it's HR, but not necessarily, client privilege protected, versus if it's an analyst on your team, and so I think understanding really clearly the topics and the nature, and to some extent, like going in and to some extent being able to pivot on that if the conversation veers into a direction you don't expect. I think there's a whole set of things to think through there.
Right. So I like where you went with that. You started talking about data, and if you trace where the data goes with this system that you subscribe to for sometimes a free trial for 2 weeks and then $12 a month or whatever, you have conversations that are happening. Who are you having them with? Well, maybe it's internal meetings. Maybe it's customer meetings.
Right.
What are they talking about? Where does it go? Whose cloud's it in? What kind of review have you? I mean, it's walking through a risk scenario here. What kind of assurance do you have that third-party AI tool?
Right.
Where is their data being stored?
Right. How does it handle data on international citizens?
Are you helping them train their data?
Right.
Yeah. So all these risks that come up.
I mean, that's just natural. I mean, as we talk about like governance and AI, those are just natural risks that go into just AI in
AI in general.
Yeah. And there's been a bunch of write-ups, but Yeah, I think the biggest danger of that is data leakage, how they're treating the data, are they selling the data? I always recommend like opting out of training their
Yeah.
data
Oh
models,
yeah.
just because there's no benefit for the organization, and there's more risk that it brings. So there's really nothing, that you're gaining from that. Um, type of thing. So I think and then obviously doing your normal due diligence,
Oh, yeah.
into there. That's about all you can do from an AI perspective, from that.
I think there's probably some training in terms of like use of it from a hygienic perspective with
Yeah.
like the business units and stuff like that.
And there's some access control. Like I know there's
Absolutely,
some
yeah.
like, instead of treating it as like one big blob of data, when you give like all the training data of all the financials and all that stuff, some of those might not be public yet,
Right.
and you have to know which parts that are internally publicly accessible, like internal accessible versus, just publicly accessible.
Right.
Yeah.
Like if we're talking about what a company did last quarter, compared to this quarter, but our call is in 3 days,
Right.
like,
Right. And it's so easy when you
Yeah.
do these recordings. You get the summary, it goes in email. And depending on how you have it set up, it'll go in an email to all the people that were on the meeting invite.
Yeah.
And then it's really easy for any of those people to click on the link and then to click the button that says, "Oh, I need the link," because you give it to somebody. So now you have a shareable link. Now, how easy is it? And I don't know how easy it is to brute force that link to be able to say, "Well, what if I change some parts of the link?
Oh, right.
Will I be able to get somebody else's link? And is it available?"
Right.
And so now what data do I have? So these are all the things that I think about. Like, how could the data be exposed?
Well, and I thought it was really interesting. You brought up the legal aspect to that.
Oh,
and
yeah.
Now I never really thought about that, and hopefully they're smart enough to be wary of things recording, but that's discoverable now in a way that
absolutely,
it wasn't before.
And plus, has everybody been notified on the meeting, or are they aware that they're being recorded? Because now you
I
have
had
wiretap
that as well. You have wiretap stuff, and you even have theoretically some privacy law stuff in terms of the note taker and saying, "Oh, Justin said this." Well, if Justin happens to be a citizen in the EU, now is there GDPR stuff that applies to potentially, because there's identifiers about who Justin is and.
Well, and I mean, I don't think we've seen any stuff with this. I just had a Bible study yesterday, and we were part of did a Zoom call because somebody was promoting in, and my account had 3 people on one side, and then one person was on the other side. But I left the AI on. I didn't know about it, and then I got an email afterwards. Everything on this side of the fence was talk about Justin, and what if somebody said something and all of a sudden it came to me?
Oh, yeah.
We didn't talk about anything criminal. It was a Bible study, but I was just thinking, now that it's discoverable, and Justin said this in the notes, type of thing.
It's all transcribed.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh,
could that actually do like an if somebody saw it on
repudiation, non-repudiation?
Yeah, like if there was an email, freeze on the company and it got swept up as part of the collection of evidence.
Absolutely right.
And they saw Justin was joking around on, tax evasion or whatever. Yeah. Oh, look at this, type of thing. And just another thing that the, defense or prosecutor, the other side would just send along like, hey, it just said here that, he's doing a crime.
So let's give some.
Sorry, have these note taker apps had to respond to any requests from the CIA or FBI yet? And because FBI and Apple have to, but there's potentially a lot of information there actually,
and we would never know.
Right, of course.
Right. But yeah, I never thought of that.
How would they treat government requests for information?
Right.
Yeah,
that's very interesting. So what should so GRC persons listen to this? They're like, you know what? My company has
just give up.
Give up. Yeah, there's I saw a job at Sheets.
Do the whole what was that movie American Beauty?
Yeah.
He's like, I just want the least amount of responsibility.
Yeah, you're overqualified for this. Yeah. So, but what are your takeaways or tips for GRC teams that have to worry about? Well, is it Fireflies or Fathom or any of the other tools that are doing it, or even evaluating like Zoom or Google or Microsoft's?
Yeah.
What should they do?
The best one I have is roll it out slowly. Like,
Well, no, not that part. What about the analysis in order to give approval to the company to use that product?
well, that's what I'm saying. Like, I don't know that you give approval to the company in one swing.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
I think you give approval, okay, we're going to start with this specific team, and then you start to understand, to some extent, the nature of the conversations that team has. Because I don't know that you can treat every combination between every two individuals the same when it comes to that stuff. I mean, two executives talking is very, very different potentially than two analysts talking, right? And what happens to that data, who can analyze it, how it's searchable, how do you make it so that Copilot doesn't accidentally pick it up in its summaries? Like, there's probably stuff there. So that my gut tells me, I didn't think you have to do all the right vendor stuff, and all that diligent stuff. Yeah, and I think there's a lot there too. But from a rollout perspective, I almost alternate for, like, many of these tools are probably okay in specific situations. And so if you evaluate those specific situations, like, that's probably, to me, more the thing. Because
so acceptable use for the product.
Yep.
And a lot of times you can't even say no. You say, like, whether it's okay or not. Usually the business has already made up the mind. So
it's already purchased.
From a security perspective, we're trying to just minimize the risk of it rolling out. And
I've seen some companies that are like that, but I've recently seen some companies where when security says they can't do it, they can't do it.
Yeah.
It gets denied, and there's just no.
I don't even think that's a security responsibility there. Security's, in my opinion, to identify the risk and let business decide.
Yeah.
Type of thing. Because, we talk about two executives, talking, maybe that's just an awareness and training thing. Like, hey, executives, if you want to have a private conversation, and
by default it's off. You have to turn it, or whatever that is.
Yeah, by default it's off. You have to turn it on. Or if it's default on, maybe you just call each other. Like, and again, that's more of a training thing. Like, that's, again,
Yeah. But data sovereignty is going to get complicated, I think. So, like, where's the data stored? How's it stored? I think is huge. The access stuff is huge, right? Because, I mean, I don't know. I haven't evaluated any of these vendors, but do they work kind of like your big cloud providers where, oh no, like, your data is none of our business type thing? Or is it, well, no, we're a small startup, we're pretty agile, our admins can definitely look into your transcription to help identify issues and fix it for you.
So that's a good checklist item to understand.
Yeah.
Would you expect these companies to have like a SOC 2 attestation or a certification or something?
Yeah, I mean, they have to have some due diligence.
The more
you have
the
to do
better.
due diligence against them. You can't just take the word that say, like, we're good from security. Now, we could argue and probably get in a whole discussion of how much that's worth it. And I already mentioned today, assume that you're going to have vendors breach, at the end of the day.
But you still do have to clear a bar to get
Yeah,
it.
exactly. So they should have something.
So what you said is pretty good for people to think about is, let's just assume that the vendor, your favorite vendor for your AI note taking, publishes that they're breached tomorrow. How does that affect you? And should you be talking about that as you're deciding whether you want to use this tool?
That's why I want to know very specifically who in my organization has been approved to use this yet.
And you said you're not moving from Marriott, yet they've been breached 3 times. So
I still shop at Target.
Yeah.
I mean, at this point, it depends on the organization, but sometimes I look at the organization, if they've been breached, they're probably better at security than they were before,
because they had a 20-year consent decree.
Well, not even that. Like, hopefully if they've gotten a wake-up call and had to deal even with some of the legal aspects of it, that they're say, we don't want to do this again, type of thing.
But I like recordings of potentially particularly in like remote work situations, like recordings of potentially every conversation that happens. I mean, is it that different than email or IM or whatever? Well, not really, but how much of that is like on-prem or with providers that are like very well vetted? I think what part of the concern here is there's tons of these note-taking providers, and I don't know how thoroughly they've been put through the ringer.
They're much more likely to be startup-y.
Yeah.
especially the ones that have the really cool features that you want to get.
Right.
And what's the first thing you have to do in order to have these really cool features work? Well, you have to give it access to your inbox.
Mm-hmm.
You have to, give it all this permission.
Right.
And then
You have to give it access to your inbox?
not for AI note takers,
Oh.
but there's this one AI note taker that the AI note taking is a side effect of something they also do. But the main thing I've found very interesting about them, and I need to look into them more, I just heard somebody tell me about it, is that it will go in and look at all your email. It'll look at all the new ones. It'll actually generate responses that you can almost just click on for each email that you have in your inbox that needs
Apple
reply
does
to.
that right now. Gemini, I think if you turn it on, does that right now. Type of thing. Like the Apple Intelligence, they're moving that out right now.
Yeah.
And give summaries and all that stuff, type of thing.
Is that all local?
I don't know all the.
Okay.
It can't be all local.
Yeah, I was going to say there's so much
type of thing.
processing, I guess.
Like,
But the Apple one, I would be like, you know what? It's an
pretty
Apple's
good.
thing. Yeah, they're pretty good.
They're pretty
so
good.
I'm gonna go with that. But if it's the new startup that's looking to get a couple $1 million in VC in order to move their stuff forward.
Yeah, I don't know.
I
It's
don't know.
weird. And they might be great. They might be better than the big players because they started with that in mind. But like, yeah, they're going to have to take it on a case-by-case basis.
Yeah.
That's a great topic.
So we may have time for one more here.
Which one do you want to do?
Let's do HIPAA.
Yeah, I like that one.
Yeah.
a quick
So, well, you said this. You brought this up earlier, Justin.
Yeah.
What year was it that HIPAA went into effect the first time?
1996.
1996. And
Yep.
this is the first time that they're really, well, there was high tech.
High tech, yeah.
But this is the
high-tech.
first like major
Yep.
HIPAA overhaul. And so, and you brought up something else because we're kind of at the mercy of the administration right now that just went into place.
Yep.
And the administration may be is looking to pull back certain regulations.
They put a moratorium on all regulatory stuff pending review,
Right.
type of thing. And they just, new administration, they're kind of freezing everything until they get their own people in and clear it out. I'm not sure. I think this is a cross political party item.
Okay.
I don't see this being a showstopper, but again, it comes down to priorities.
Right.
Either which way, one of the things, first off, and I'm follow the, being in governance, you've learned to see how the rules are passed and all that stuff. One of the things that first caught my eye is how is it that they're going to update this law when this was passed by Congress? HHS is going to update the law. Apparently, I think it was in 2009, there's a reasonableness, type of thing that as long as they're sticking within the spirit of it, they can update laws to stay current and everything.
And that's actually the intent across a lot of departments, really, because the intended approach was, Congress doesn't have to be an expert in everything. You rely on certain departments to do the things. So I think...
And it's become, over the 20, 25 years, it's gotten more and more...
It's gotten complicated.
Where they're pushing it more to the executive branch to make up their own rules and everything. And we could argue plus and minuses onto that. But in this case here, HIPAA does need a refresh.
Oh, yeah.
There's so many things that are anniquated in the first version that I really like what they're fixing. Well, just some other facts though is this could go into effect as early as the end of 2025 or early 2026.
I saw that. I can't imagine.
Well, right now it's
request for comment.
Yeah, and that is expiring in March.
Yep.
And then there's a 60-day period. So once that's done, then there's some unknown time.
Fuzzy.
For them to finalize
and then it's like 100-day for
and then
implementation.
it's
180 for
60
implementation.
days until it goes into effect after being published, and then you have another 180 days in order to for most places to be able to.
And they could do another iteration of every department does a little bit of CMMC, we've seen how long that's taken to go out. I remember following when they did the Second Amendment to the New York DFS cybersecurity standard, Reg 500. They took 3 requests for comment.
So that's another 60 days, another 60 days.
Exactly.
Reset the
At the
clock.
end, they were just there were comments coming in. They were like, "Yeah, we're doing it our way. Yeah, we're doing it." Like it was just a very short. Like, yeah, we're not doing this. Like they just got. But yeah, they took 3.
Yeah.
Again, like not knowing the timeline.
Well, sure. And so at some point it'll be finalized.
Yeah.
And it was published in the Federal Register, and that's what becomes the official time clock for the 60 days. And just to give a context, you can go look this thing up. It's a short, only 125 page, 3 columns of small print document, but it's summarized really nicely on the HHS's website. With, I don't know, it looks like a couple dozen main categories of things. And my question to you guys is, even if it doesn't go into effect, did you see anything in it that's not worth doing? And we can talk about what they're talking about.
No,
I liked it,
but I really want to see how they're going to deal with, because they talk about like smaller organizations, type of thing, and like some of the stuff is like, they need essentially a CMDB and inventory of systems that it's all under scope with that. That's one thing that HIPAA didn't have. And when I do HIPAA assessments, I generally recommend 866. 66. And they added a few additional things outside HIPAA. One of it being inventory. They're like, do a risk assessment across your HIPAA environment. Well, but right before they're like, identify what your HIPAA environment
is. How
can
you secure it if you don't know you have it?
Exactly. Right? So these are all good stuff. But, when you're talking about like a 5-site dental site, or a single practitioner's office, or something like that.
Some of these are going to be a little tough, and they're a little bit like, I don't think they're wrong, and they should be doing them.
Right.
But I don't expect it to be reasonable. So I have something else I want to come back to, but for those, vuln scanning every 6 months and a pen test annually.
Yeah.
For most organizations, they should be doing vuln scanning at least on a continuous model. What does continuous mean? To me, it's like, would you have a monthly cycle to get things done, and do a pen test every year? It seems to make sense. But I've talked to companies that have been in existence for 5 years. They're coming on as new customers, and they've never done a pen test. And then we get into the point of one of the things we do is, they just want us to run their security program from a VGRC perspective.
Yeah.
So because they want to be able to be audit ready for that SOC 2. Well, something we'll just throw in. You get a pen test. Every year you just get a pen test.
Yeah.
Well, we don't want to pay for the pen test. Can you reduce our cost? No, it's nothing extra. We'll do a pen test. We'll do a tabletop exercise, which is another thing I think they said you need to do is, be able to test your response or your recovery.
Yep.
But yeah, they have in the requirement that you have to do a full-blown security assessment and everything. And they they don't say it has to be external, but they say you have to evaluate essentially the capabilities of who would do it internally. Type of thing. So kind of hinting to say, like, if you don't have a security team, like
you need somebody qualified.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Which again, like, we all come down to this and we're like, I don't disagree with that, but I think of the little guy, and how are they going to, what line are they going to draw in the sand? How are they going to put a reasonability into this?
This applies not just to hospitals, but to business associates.
Well,
yeah. And the associates, like,
it's a follow the data,
like all that.
It's a follow the data,
and you have to give a certification every single year to each one of that pathways.
My take on this
is not a certification, a claim that you're essentially good.
It's all good stuff. I like that they're reducing the complexity of like the required versus addressable.
We didn't mention that. Yeah,
I like that it's gone.
Well, what does that mean for anybody who doesn't understand the difference between what was there before with addressable versus now required?
Well, I mean, it's.
Go make up.
Yeah, why don't you go?
So it essentially wasn't too different to it. So they labeled a whole bunch of required ones and said every organization had to do these. The addressable ones, if you look at a lot of the HSS, they said if your environment is applicable to this, you still have to put it into play.
You have to address it. It's addressable.
Which is essentially coming down to it is how I always kind of thought about it.
But you still had to put the control in if it was applicable within your environment. So a lot of the controls were like wireless or something along that line.
So what would people do instead? they would start to claim it's not addressable.
Right.
Wouldn't really do it.
Yeah, but you have to look at, again, whether it's applicable to your environment. You didn't have the option to say no if it had an impact into your environment, technically as the reg was written. But a lot of people, like
just
you
talk
said,
around it.
They would take advantage of the fact that it says addressable
Right.
and then not do anything.
Right.
Yeah, but now it's essentially just will be a list of requirements, and there might be non-applicable stuff, but that's how you would explain it away, type of thing. Like I don't know what it would be, but if you didn't have any PHI at rest, then you don't have to do encryption at rest because you didn't have any PHI.
Right.
It was
or something
super,
like that.
intentionally flexible, right? But to your point, people would take advantage of it. So I like that it's simpler from that perspective. But to your guys' point about the little guy, I mean, there's so many very small organizations that deal with legitimate health data, right? And even just like not-for-profits and stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
I mean, they don't necessarily have big budgets. They don't necessarily, and marshaling the resources to do some of these things is going to be problematic. I'm not here to defend CMMC, but I think the potential for some leveling here might make some sense.
That's very interesting.
Whether it's across the controls or at a minimum in terms of like the implementation cadence.
Well, and I like how I think it should be on the amount of records that they deal with, because when we're looking at a kind of impact, I think that should be where the bar is, no matter kind of size, type of thing. Like if you're a small organization, most likely you're going to do with less records.
Unless you're a small organization that's a software as a service,
right,
who's servicing
then
your
you should be
big,
held to a higher standard. At that
huge hospital.
Because again, we're looking at impact if you were breached. So if you have more records, you should be held to a higher standard, into that.
Yeah.
And I don't know where that bar would be, but that's essentially where I'm thinking like you need the next level of security if you're over 5 million PHI records, individual PHI records or something like that. Like if you're dealing that much, then hey, you get the full gambit. If you're less than that, like a mom and pop, general practitioner office, okay, you probably have 1,000 clients or 1,500 or whatever it is,
PCI really did a number on you, huh?
Well, PCI, but that's you still have to do the full gambit. It's
Well, it's true.
How much you're measured.
It's true. Yeah, that's fair. Well, was that a potential option as well?
I mean, maybe, yeah. I think that should also be into there because they're also going to put in that they're going to do more regular audits. Like that was some of the stuff. It's not in the law here, but
that just came out as
that they want to do regular audits, and they've been very sporadic. It's like they paid PwC 1 year to do a whole bunch of audits, and it was
about 3 years ago or so.
Yeah, and they split up between BAs and covered entities. Like it was was it 150 covered entities and 50 BAs, or like 125 or something like that? Yeah. It was like 200 total scope, and they basically said go and do the audit.
So do you think they'll, under this new administration, get the funding in order to do that, or do you think that's one of the things they're going to cut?
That's I'm not a.
I have no idea either.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see how it shakes out.
Well, but there, I mean, I don't know how people are going to take sides, but politically, I do expect there to be battles because the cost to implement is going to be high, and people are going to be looking to figure out how that impacts them on, how it impacts people's political futures if they're impacting a bunch of small business owners or whatever that looks like.
Yeah. And so just, there's like, I don't know, I wrote down a list of like 15 or 10 of these items that I thought were interesting. You hit on a couple of them. Some other ones I think would be interesting for just people to know about. Not only should they put the asset inventory together, but it's also the part of that requirement is to put a data flow diagram together about how EPHI flows across the network. And then you also have to do your annual compliance audits against the security rule requirements.
Yeah.
So what does that mean? It means take a look at the actual law and do your gap assessment. So somebody comes... Typically, people have done, I've seen this done wrong a lot of times. People would say, I need to do my assessment. What does that mean? They went through the HIPAA rules and they said, yes, I'm doing these, or no, I'm not. And what are they doing? And then that's different than a risk assessment.
The risk assessment
is
totally different.
Is asset-based on your threats and your vulnerabilities. And so you got to handle that.
And they clarified a lot of the risk assessment stuff in this, right?
They did.
And I like those clarifications.
They increased the requirements for them too, so you need to get yourself aware of those. And then business partners must confirm every year in writing that they have the required security measurements to protect. Exactly. I'm going to skip a couple of these. They're in there, but one thing I like, requiring MFA.
Yeah.
You can't get enough MFA. That's multi-factor authentication if you didn't know.
I didn't see, could there be exceptions into that? I didn't see if there was.
I didn't see exceptions to MFA. I didn't see any exceptions to that written in there.
Going to get funky with some old
I know with
technology.
DFS and everything, it was essentially like the same requirement, but the CISO could authorize exceptions, you know, type of thing, which I think is appropriate because there might be a situation, you know, when you're dealing with a critical SaaS that you just can't get rid of or something like that.
Yeah.
Like,
that's
I don't know, you know, type of thing.
See how that unfolds.
Yeah.
Well, maybe that'll come out in the comments and get clarified.
Yeah.
And then some other ones, require network segmentation. What does that mean? It's so simple. Require network segmentation. Well,
I've done multiple calls on HIPAA segmentation on that, and it's like, it's not required, but now
it is. So, you know, and shameless plug on our website, we just did a blog post on this.
Did you?
Summarizing the new rules. We have a checklist of things you can go do.
Oh, awesome.
We'll include that in the show notes.
Yeah,
that's
it's
great.
out there.
Yeah, but network segmentation is one I see organizations get wrong a lot because you'll have infrastructure teams being like, we put everything into like buckets of IP addresses, and they're like, okay, do you restrict any traffic between them? They go, no, why would we do that?
It's on a different VLAN.
It's segmented. So and how's that going to work? Especially for a small organization, it's segmentation. If you're small enough, is one segment. What you got is all you need.
Right.
So,
it gets weird.
Anyway, I think we beat up the new HIPAA item pretty well. It's out there. It's new. It's not in place yet. It might be in place late 2025, early 2026.
Comment on it if you want. We'll have another episode on it, on what the actual finality
that's
is.
fair. I think that'd be good.
Yeah, but definitely include that in.
You know,
directionally, I like it. I just don't know what it's going to do to small.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. So I hope some version of it does pass, type of thing. And hopefully it's reasonable enough that it includes like considerations for smaller organizations. If that would be my perfect scenario if that all happened.
I think that's right.
Otherwise, we'll see a lot of new 20-year consent decrees.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So,
they like dishing out the fine. So,
hey,
all right, gentlemen.
Cheers, guys.
Yeah,
episode 9 and everything. Thank you all for joining us. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And join us next month as we do episode 10. Thanks, all.